Lawyers, today's Wednesday, September the 17th, 12:31 Rio de Janeiro time. We are starting one more live stream. Welcome here, and as usual, feel free to share your topics of interest in the chat window so we can discuss live. And let's get started with some news. Let's see what's going on in the Brazilian newspapers. Okay, so this is Estadão. That's one of the main newspapers in Brazil. And today's main headline is Centrão. Centrão means like a kind of cohesive block of Congress people who are kind of center-oriented, right? Like they are not to the left, they are not to the right, they are more like, central in terms of ideology. And what they are trying to do, not only actually, this big block in the middle of the political aisle, but other Congress people as well, they're trying to pass an amendment to the Brazilian Constitution, kind of precluding the Brazilian Supreme Court to have as much leeway as they have today in terms of judging Congress people, okay? And this outcome, according to, the political leaderships of different parties is coming because of how the Supreme Court kind of, took away the mandates of a few Congress people, right? So it was basically, like a judgment by the Supreme Court without much chance for those Congress people to defend themselves. That's the thesis of the political leaderships trying to pass this amendment to the Brazilian Constitution. Very interesting to note, particularly if you're coming from a country such as the United States, in which you have, so a few clauses. The Brazilian Constitution is actually quite long. So, very different take. Like the Brazilian Constitution is more detail-oriented, and the U.S. Constitution is more principle-oriented. Okay, and the concept here is that if the political leadership, if they are able to pass this amendment to the Constitution, then it's going to be like the Constitution. That's the idea of like an upper set of rules that should apply to everyone, including the Brazilian Supreme Court, right? So that's what you see over here. These are the main headlines. And there is also something, I'm not sure if they refreshed the page, but yeah, so it's no longer showing on the first page, but there was like, a news from the Brazilian Supreme Court saying that they are expecting something from the United States in terms of punishment for finding former President Bolsonaro guilty. That's the ongoing dispute between Brazil and the United States, right? Like we are all, we all wanted like for this dispute, for this bad blood that is getting worse and worse by the day between Brazil and the United States to end, okay? And hopefully we're gonna get there. I'm just unsure if this is going to happen anytime soon. All right, let's take a look and see if we have any participation so far. I don't see any messages. If you are live here with us, please let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me, and if you can type as well. Just send us a hello. All right, I see James. James is going to be the first one. Welcome, James. James Rochas. Or James Rochas. Olá, tudo bem? I'm waiting for my R&M card for 2 weeks now. I got added in the system on 31st of August. how long it will take to receive this card. James, it's going to depend on the Polícia Federal in which you applied, and the timeline is usually between a month to 2 months, right? In the past, they wanted to print those cards real fast. Eventually, there was a problem with the machinery. I think there was like 2 printers for those cards in the entire country. Nowadays, they are trying to better manage, like the production of the RNM card. So typically, what we see is taking between a month to a couple of months, James. And curious, like, what is your immigration route? Like, what have you applied for? Is it like a digital nomad? Is it a marriage-based, or is it a retirement track? Let us know, James. Aaron, good to see you, Aaron. Live with some delay, I think. All right, Aaron. Thank you for letting me know. Matt Gaines, good to see you, Matt. All right, Matt said he was going to show up, and he did show up. Good to see you, Matt. All right. So, as usual, if you have topics of your interest, let me know, and we're going to discuss those topics live. In the meantime, I'm going to discuss a topic from our backlog here. All right. I know you don't like the business investment, visa. Can you explain why? Is there a way to work with you if we pick this specific visa? And there is some, private information here, right? So, for those of you who don't know, there are different investment visas for Brazil, right? The typical one, or the one that we like the most, is the real estate investment visa. We like it because it's pretty straightforward. You buy the real estate, you have access, right, to a 4-year residency, and this 4-year residency, once you've been through, it renews as a permanent residency. You can rent out the property. You just need to be in Brazil for a couple of weeks every other year to maintain your status. So from our understanding, this is the most solid investment route. Now, there is a second one, which is investment in a company, right? And the reason why, people say we don't like it, and is that, we don't think that investing in a business in Brazil, it's suitable for most of the foreign citizens, okay? Like, particularly if you're coming from a developed country, it could be the UK, it could be the United States, it could be Canada, right? It could be, Germany. Whenever you try to run a business in Brazil, there are several challenges that are not going to be typical in your country, right? So in our understanding, you're trying to, tackle a business elsewhere, trying to understand the culture and learn everything on the fly. Additionally, you're going to need to create employment, okay? And employment in Brazil, it is completely different from employment elsewhere, right? There are very specific conditions for the employment to qualify. You're going to need to hire these people. And in Brazil, believe it or not, you cannot just fire people away, right? If you fire people, you need to pay a huge penalty for firing people, in addition to all sorts of benefits. All right. So if you have a business and you're not using this business for immigration, it may make sense for you to employ people, to really, spend the time and energy developing this business. In our experience, that's not what's going to happen for most people. For most people, they're saying, well, I think I could run a business. And by the way, I also need, an immigration pathway. So why not doing both things combined, right? And that's where the problem rests, in this kind of combination, right, in which your permanency in the country is going to depend on a business that could work, but maybe not. And I'm sure you know about that, right? Like, I mean, businesses even in the United States, or developed nations in Europe, chances like the chances are higher for this business not to go forward than it is, for the business to succeed, right? So why would you rely on something that is risky, to say the least, in order for you to have your immigration journey in Brazil? So that's our take right now. Don't take me wrong. Like, whenever we see people who know what they're doing, like, they are, business people in the United States, they've been exporting to Brazil, I don't know, for 10 years, right? Like, I mean, and they just say, well, listen, a natural step for my business is to have like a kind of satellite operation in Brazil, and I have the market already. I have experience. I have local partners. In this case, I think it makes a lot of sense if this entrepreneur, if they want to establish themselves in Brazil, right? But that's a very different story from 90% of people who are going to reach out to us saying, well, what about opening a business to get me the permanent residency, right? Like, I mean, we can tell just by the question that it does not look like a good idea. All right, I hope that makes sense. All right, we see James Rochas applied in Fortaleza. Obrigado. Welcome to the gang, James. Brazil Vibes, good to see you, Brazil Vibes. Hi, Mr. Oliveira. Does having credit in the United States matter in Brazil? Good credit. And does Nomad State offer financing for those who want to purchase real estate in Brazil? Thank you. All right, Brazil. That's Brazil Vibes. That's a good question. Typically, traditional, banks or traditional financiers in Brazil, they are unable to work with information coming from abroad, right? Like, so your credit report is not going to translate to something in Brazil. Typically, Brazilian banks, they are unable to read your credit score from the United States. It does not matter if you have like a credit report with TransUnion, Experian. They cannot access that credit report. And if you deliver the credit report, naturally, the bank is going to say, well, I don't know if this thing is legit or not. And even if it is, I don't know how to interpret, okay? So that's a piece of the challenge. The second piece is going to be your proof of income, right? So how are you going to prove your income? You may have W-2s, you may have a tax return, you may have a bank statement, and all of those things, they make sense like to a lender in the United States, but not necessarily to Brazil. So what we see when it comes to traditional mortgage, traditional finance, is that the Brazilian lenders, they're going to prefer to see things that they can measure in Brazil, right? So for instance, once you get your CPF, like your Brazilian CPF, during your journey in Brazil, you're going to be able to develop a credit score in Brazil as well. And that's going to be the credit score that's going to command your journey in terms of credit worthiness, all right? So that's on the credit score side. In terms of income, another typical way for a foreign citizen to prove their income in Brazil is going to be through the tax filing. Once you become a tax resident in Brazil, guess what? You're going to need to file taxes in Brazil, and you're going to need to declare your tax from abroad as well, because Brazil is going to tax you on your global income, not just on the income that you have from Brazil. Of course, there are provisions trying to avoid or at least mitigate like double taxation. But at the end of the day, yes, you're going to need to disclose your global income. And when you disclose your global income through the tax filing in Brazil, guess what? You are allowing a Brazilian lender to look at a trustworthy document, right? Because now they are saying, well, this is not like a paper that someone is presenting to me like from the US, which I don't know if it is real or not. There is no way for me to verify. If you are presenting your Brazilian tax return, yes, the lender is going to be able to check, to verify that document, and to have a very solid evidence of your repayment capability, if you will. All right, Brazil Vibe. So this is like the overall context for property finance in Brazil. This said, in some cities or some states or some markets, you're gonna find, like some interesting, innovative offers, right? Like particularly in Florianopolis and Camboriú, in the state of Santa Catarina, there is a long-term tradition of developers offering short-term finance to buyers. So they are not going to offer you like a 20 or 15, 30 year a mortgage, but it's not unusual to find developers financing for up to 5 years a property purchase. Okay, something similar that happens in Rio de Janeiro, right? So tell me, what is your target market, Brazil Vibes? I'm curious. I'm not sure if you shared before, but the target market is going to be important for you to know if there are alternatives out there or not. In Rio de Janeiro, kind of similar to what you see in Santa Catarina, more specifically Camboriú and Florianopolis. In Rio de Janeiro, now some developers, they are partnering up with banks to offer a more long-term finance. Okay, like we heard about 10 years finance, which is unheard of, like in other markets in Brazil. And they can also potentially work with documentation from abroad, right? Now, just keep in mind, right? Like sometimes banks, they're going to change those policies. Sometimes they're going to test the waters. They're going to be offering this finance. But maybe, right, like if they start to see some concerns with those loans, like they may kind of, step back and remove such options from the market. But I can tell you, Brazil Vibes, that in Rio de Janeiro, nomad states, right? Like they do have access, because I know, like, I spoke about that with them not long ago, and they said, listen, for new development, some of the developers are able to get you a finance with traditional Brazilian banks. Rio de Janeiro, like Florianopolis, Camboriú, they are all cities with a large expat community, and therefore, yes, it makes sense for some lenders, right, like to try to kind of develop this market. I think it's a very interesting question, Brazil Vibe. So if your market is Rio de Janeiro, short answer is potentially yes. There would be finance for a purchase. Aaron, I'm planning on going the marriage visa route and buying property in a non-compliant way. If marriage doesn't work out, what would selling and rebuying property involve, or could I fix it in any other way? Aaron, buying a property in a non-compliant way, are you talking about how you're going to pay, right? Because the two main requirements for you to preserve the option of, using the properties for, the immigration down the line are going to be how you're going to be paying. And second, if this property has a title or not. Okay, so let's say if you buy a property in Florianopolis, right? Believe it or not, in Florianopolis, there are many properties without titles. They are sold on a possession-only basis. There are many challenges in Florianopolis. Florianopolis is an island. This island was owned by a few families, like a couple of centuries ago. And the way that the market developed is unique. And as a result of this historical development in Florianopolis, there is a huge number of properties without a title, right? And people, they buy and they sell. Now there are some substantial downsides, right? One downside is that no bank is going to want to touch a property that doesn't have a title, right? So even for you to send the money to buy a property in Florianopolis, like you are unable to send this money from abroad if you tell the bank that you are sending the money to buy real estate. Some people, they are going to send in installments. Some people, they are going to, send as availability, which is another track defined by the Brazilian Central Bank for you to send the money to Brazil. But the point here is that if you have a title, Aaron, and if you send the money directly to the seller, you're kind of preserving the possibility of applying for the real estate investor visa down the line, all right? Another point of concern, which I typically share in our consultations, is that the minimum amount should be changed eventually, right? The same amount has been the same since 2018, and we are basically 7-8 years down the line with the same amount in Brazilian reais. We did some calculations over here, and if you update the amount just based on inflation alone, it should be potentially almost double of the minimum requirement. All right, so Aaron, there are ways for you to, even though you're not gonna be, let's say, using this property right now for applying to the Brazil investor visa, there are ways for you to preserve this possibility for down the line. James Rochas for digital nomad visa. There you go, James. Such a nice choice. Let me ask you something else, James. Is it Fortaleza that you are establishing yourself in, or do you like other areas? Are you familiar with Ceará as a whole? Like, have you been to Beberibe, Morro Branco, Fortim, Canoa Quebrada, Jericoacoara? There's so many nice destinations, right? Like, of course, Florianopolis is the capital, is a big city by the Northeast standards, right? But there are so many interesting cities in Ceará. Nice sharing, James. Marisa Navas, boa tarde, Dr. Luciano. As suas lives são muito importantes para nós. Thank you so much for the kind words, Marisa. I'm not sure if you are with Ricardo, but thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for showing up. And thank you for your help in Portugal, right? Thank you so much. Aaron, I have had success with builder financing Brazil for new construction using my non-Brazilian information, but I'm paying around 4% of the sale price per month. It makes sense, Aaron. And let us know in which market where you're able to buy this property. 4%. So per month, we're talking about like what? It would be like 20 payments or, 22, 23 payments, right? Like, that would be less than 2 years finance. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like, it does sound pretty much like what you see in Santa Catarina, Camboriú. Another perspective, Aaron, is that you typically also get this type of finance, and even as a foreign citizen, when you're buying a new development, as long as you pay off the total price by the keys, right? So that's typical because when the developer is actually working on the construction, typically is not a traditional loan, right? Like, it's more like a self-finance that the builders do, and in this case, that would apply more, throughout the country. Now, the traditional finance, the one, for, like 10 years, 20 years, this one is the real challenging one. But really nice sharing, Aaron. Let us know where you bought. Very interesting. Brazil Vibes, thank you so much, Brazil Vibes. Thank you for buying me lunch again, Brazil Vibes. So cool. So generous of you. Thank you. My target market for financing a property is Northeast Brazil, Fortaleza, etc. Brazil Vibes, thank you for sharing that. Let me tell you something. Ceará, the state of Ceará, okay, not exactly in Fortaleza. That's the state in which we have the highest number of buyers coming to us to sue the seller, right? Particularly because of like long-term self-finance, right? Not long-term, like 10 years. They typically finance, for something between 2 to 5 years. But there is something. I don't know. Like I don't wanna, I don't wanna blame like local developers or say that they have a problem, a behavior problem. But it is a repetitive occurrence that we have here at the farm. People buying like usually plots of land by the beach. They pay, like the developer for the land, and then they pay the developer, to build a house. And time passes, they don't deliver the house. There are excuses of all sorts, right? Like the main one for 23 and 24, it was still COVID, right? Nowadays they are changing they are presenting different excuses. But, I cannot emphasize enough, how unfortunately cities in Ceará will rank really high in terms of non-delivery of, properties bought by foreign citizens, particularly in the smaller cities of the coastal line of Ceará. All right, Brazil Vibes. So that's some sharing for you to consider. Now, I would say Fortaleza city itself, it could be a safer bet, particularly if you buy from a large developer, okay? The problem is like when you start to buy in those smaller cities, sometimes you're dealing with smaller developers, some of them targeting foreign citizens, right? There is one here, I'm not going to tell the name, but they have been targeting foreign citizens very effectively, right? Like they would do a type of meetup, over I don't know which channel they were using, but they would attract a large number, especially of Europeans, to invest in those like plots of land, and then to build the property, and then they would sell a package with furniture, and then they would tell you that you would be able to rent and make a lot of money. Nothing of that was happening to many buyers, particularly from Europe. Okay, so here is the heads up, Brazil Vibes, and thank you again for the generous gift. Christopher, olá, Dr. Oliveira. Olá, Christopher. If I buy a condo under a company named Lisbon and rent it for $100 US a month, can I get a W-2 visa? I am employed by my company, getting salary, paying social security. Christopher, so for the D2, right, like for those of you who don't know, the D2 is the so-called entrepreneur visa for Portugal. And very interesting, there is no minimum requirement, right? Like Christopher is probably researching about this topic. And just to make an analogy, like the Brazilian one, the one that we were discussing at the beginning of this live stream in Brazil, yes, there is a minimum amount. For typical companies, it's going to be 500,000 reais, which is like, about 90,000 US dollars. There is no limit for Portugal. Portugal says, listen, you need to present me a credible plan, a credible business plan. I need to, see your credentials. And if I'm convinced that this is a true business, we're going to let you, come to Portugal under the D2 visa. All right, Christopher. So here the amounts, right? The amounts are not going to, be commanding, even though when you present the paperwork, you're going to need to have, money in a Portuguese bank account at that point, okay? There are sometimes change of policy in terms of that in the Portuguese consulates, but even in the United States, like our clients, they are being required for a bank account to be opened upfront in Portugal and for the money to be deposited upfront so the immigration can see that you have the funds, right? Very, very, typical of Portugal. Brazil, on the other hand, they don't care at all where the money is. For instance, whenever you're applying for the digital nomad or whenever you're applying for the retirement visas in Brazil, Brazil is going to be asking you about your money in your country of residency, right? The United States, for instance. Brazil is not going to ask you to have money in Brazil, okay? Portugal is the other way around. Like they want the money to be in Portugal. They want to see the money to then consider your application. So for the D2, Christopher, they would want to see an amount of money that would be meaningful, right, for the D2. So if you are buying a condo, right, a condo in Lisbon, it could be easily like 300,000 euros, right, like for a condo in Lisbon, and now the business plan would need to look good. I don't know, Christopher, from the top of my head, if just buying a property and renting out, if that would look like a legitimate business, right? Like, I mean, I have my concerns, all right, Christopher, but nice sharing. Maybe not a single, condo, but let's say if you would buy a plot of land and develop, like some cabins for rental throughout the year, that would make more sense as a business, in my opinion. A single unit, it does not sound so much as a business from the Portuguese perspective, if you will, Christopher. So maybe, instead of a condo in Lisbon, you could think about a quinta. A quinta is the Portuguese word for a small, a ranch outside of the city, in which you could have, some smaller constructions, but maybe, 4 or 5 that you could rent out, with some leisure infrastructure, maybe a pool, like some vines, for people to, catch some grapes, this type of stuff that people like to do when they are in Portugal. That could be another idea for you to consider, Christopher. Aaron, non-compliant as in the transfer of money into Brazil using Wise and Remitly. Buying new construction condos in a city outside of São Paulo. Yeah, Aaron, the Wise Remitly route is kind of concerning, right? For every single application that we have here at the firm, and we do have many, we do provide the currency exchange contract, tagging the money as money to buy real estate, right? Like whenever you send the money, through Remitly or Wise, like up to $10,000, guess what? The red tape is practically non-existent. But on the other hand, you don't have like an official currency exchange contract. So I get what you're saying, Aaron. It does make sense. This way of sending money is non-compliant, and therefore this could preclude you from applying for the real estate investor visa in the future. Oh, all right. Aaron is sharing the builder financed property is in Hortolândia, right? Hortolândia, I think it's the countryside of São Paulo, right? I signed the contract during the pre-lançamento with 20% down payment, and with 20 payments to line up with the builder, usually delivery timeline of 18 months. Perfect, Aaron. Yes, that's exactly what we were talking about. Typically, builders are going to self-finance during the construction period, but typically, like the risk they want to avoid is to hand you the keys without being paid for the balance, right? So even myself, like, when I buy pre-construction stuff, like I'm going to finance, and my strategy, right, like is different from many other people. Many other people, they're going to say, well, I want the largest discount I can ever get. I don't mind paying a lot upfront, right? Like my strategy is to pay the minimal amount I can during the construction, because you never know, right? Like, I mean, there is always this possibility of a global war. And if there is a global war, I guarantee 90% of the Brazilian developers, they are going to go bankrupt, right? If there is a global war. So you never know if there is going to be a global war or not. If I had to guess, I would say probably less than 5% chance. Thank God, right? But I don't like to gamble my money, right? So what I try to do is to pay as little as possible. I pay, sometimes 30% during the construction period of time. And the builder, they are not going to give me the keys until I pay the missing 70, right? But I'm not going to pay the missing 70. I'm going to actually get finance with a bank, and then I'm going to use the finance to pay off the builder. That's when the builder is going to give him the keys, because if I don't pay off the 70%, I don't get the keys. Once I get the keys, then I send this property to short-term rentals. And basically, the income from the short-term rentals is going to pay, like the monthly mortgage for the property, right? So what I'm doing, like I'm basically buying a property with 30% of the sell price, and then I just forget about the property and just leave it that like in my portfolio, all right? That's my strategy. I don't mind. I don't pursue deep discounts, because I know developers, like if you're trying to get a substantial discount, they're going to want like most of the price paid during the construction period, okay? So just sharing my strategy, right? Like, of course, you guys can decide on what works best for you. But nice sharing, Aaron. Matt Gaines, regarding the retirement visa, what would an application used to show the passive income? Bank statement showing retirement annuity deposits. So Matt, typically let's say for Social Security, right? Typically, when you're receiving Social Security, you have a letter from the federal administration showing your benefits, and it's basically like a summary. I think it's a couple of pages, if I'm not mistaken. I know that our team, they are going to use this statement for the Social Security account. That's one of the things they're going to use. The second one they are going to use is going to be the bank statements, right? So you need to show through a statement that you are receiving traditional retirement income. That's the first thing. The second one, you need to show that you're drawing, that you are receiving the payments already. Okay, it cannot be something like in the potential, right? Like that's not compliant. You need to be receiving already, right? Like something very common, someone is going to say, well, I have a 401k like with $1 million, right? And but I don't want to draw now because this and that. I need to wait until this age. Otherwise, I'm going to pay penalties and so on. Can I apply? I say, no, you cannot apply. Like you need to be drawing the money. You actually need to present like 3 months of a bank statement to show that you've been drawing, and that that income coming from the retirement is consistent, right? And there are Matt, like there are different levels of qualifying income, right? Like the income that Brazil likes the most is going to be traditional one, meaning Social Security, pension, right? Like I don't know, board of elementary school educators of California, right? Like I'm getting a pension here. That's the amount I'm getting. Pension for death, right? Like sometimes, for certain professions or certain situations, someone is going to receive a monthly amount in pension because of the death of a parent, for instance, right? Like that one is going to qualify as well. The other typical traditional requirement is going to be VA benefits, okay? Veterans receiving VA benefits, that's super welcome by Brazil, so they qualify as well. Second level is going to be stuff that's not as official as per the Brazilian understanding, but they're still good, they're still retirement related. And then we're going to be talking about the 401ks, we're going to be talking about the IRAs, we're going to be talking about annuities, right? So that's going to be the second level. Typically, they are going to work well for an application. Okay, so here you're mentioning, like the annuity, and annuity is going to work just fine. All right. Third level is going to be stuff like property rental. Is going to be something like a company that's paying you something as a passive income. The third level, typically Brazil is not going to accept as your primary source of income. Brazil could potentially accept that as a supplement to your main source of income. So let's say if you're getting 1,100, right, 1,100 in Social Security, you would not qualify because the minimum requirement is 2,000. But let's say if you have a property rental, a rental property bringing $900 monthly, right? So the Brazilian government would allow you to apply with the 1,100 from Social Security plus the 900 from the rental property, okay? Because the majority of the income would be coming from a qualified retirement income. All right, Jay. Hi, we spoke on a consultation a few weeks ago. Welcome back, Jay. I then used the firm to open a non-resident bank account to let you know. Great decision on my part. Can't say enough about your associates I worked with. So nice to hear that, Jay. Very generous of you to share that. We cannot share client information here, but I'm very happy to hear that your experience has been great. All right, Jay. And I'm not sure if you did that already. Like if you were, like if you're satisfied with with the associate, don't forget to give this associate a nice review on Google. Okay, they get like a token bonus from the firm. Very happy to hear that, Jay. Thank you so much for sharing. Aaron Lopes. Oi, bom dia, Luciano. Bom dia, Aaron. Good to see you back. In Brazil, I understand the visa by a business investment is hard. However, what if you are out of the operations and you only offer cash for shares in a company? Is that accepted? Aaron, it is. All right, it is. Like, there is a regulation, right? Like the transition would be actually a normative resolution. I think it doesn't make much sense when you translate that, but let's say Regulation 13. That's the one addressing the type of route you are suggesting over here, and which is basically investing in a business, right? They are not asking you to be managing the entity. They want you to invest the money, and they want your money to work for the purpose of the business plan, right? So here, there is not so much a concern that you're going to be running the business, but then there is another concern that you're going to hope that the business is run in a way that is going to survive over time, that is going to, at least keep the value of your money, and that's going to create the job positions that were promised in the business plan. All right, Aaron? So basically, you're removing one type of risk and you're bringing another type of risk to the table, okay? Another very common situation, probably not the majority. It could be like the minority of cases, but there's still something recurring here at the firm. Is like a foreign citizen comes from abroad. Foreign citizen comes with money, and then there is a Brazilian partner. They form a business entity, and 2-3 years down the line, the foreign citizen is suing the Brazilian for whatever, right? Like the Brazilian didn't repay the money that he should repay. The Brazilian party promised something and did something else, right? So not an ideal solution as well, Aaron, okay? But yes, it is accepted, and it is actually something that we see happening every now and then. All right, Aaron. Jay, we spoke about retirement visa. Would you confirm all I need is a retirement income, say Social Security, and I can still be employed and work remotely for a U.S. firm. Jay, so let's, all you need is a retirement income, right? So the retirement income is part of the requirements. You also need like a clean background check, right? You need other documents that are going to be supporting your retirement income. For instance, they are going to ask for the bank statements to show that you're drawing, right? The retirement income. That's another thing. They are going to ask you for a letter proving that you can wire the funds to Brazil, which is kind of weird, but it is a requirement, and we are able to assist with this requirement. There is about like 5 documents that you're going to need to have apostilled when sending to Brazil. They're all going to revolve around either the retirement income or your FBI background check if you are coming from the United States, right? So once you have those things, they are typically what is needed, right? I would say that 9 times out of 10, we are approving people with just those things. However, the immigration has discretion to ask for additional stuff, right? So I would just avoid to say all you need is that, right? I would say that's probably all you need, okay? If you allow me, the legalese, right? Like the attorney wording, like I don't want to get in trouble to say, yes, it is what you need. And then they ask you for something additional and you say, well, you said it was just that, right? But aside of that, yes, that's pretty much, the qualifying retirement income, clean background check, okay, and a bunch of paperwork, right? Like a bunch of paperwork. Don't forget, there is a lot of red tape and bureaucracy in Brazil. So even though they are not asking for much, at the application itself, like it does require a large number of documents, if that makes sense, Jay. Now, the other part of your question that I can see over here, and I can still be employed and working remotely for a U.S. firm, right? So for this second piece here, first thing, there is no language in the Brazilian regulation addressing the Brazil retirement visa saying that you cannot work. Okay, so my interpretation is that the Brazilian government doesn't care if you work or not. My interpretation is that the Brazil government is concerned about your income. So as long as you have a safe income, safe, compliant, traditional retirement income, you gold, okay? Because the regulation, again, doesn't address working while you're retired. Another perspective, and that's going to be more personal, the way I read this whole thing is like, why would Brazil tell that people cannot work? I think it should be the opposite, right? Like Brazil should say, listen, even if you're retired, if you come into Brazil, you need to make yourself useful, right? Brazil is not going to want people, I don't know, just watching TV or, going play bingo or eating every single day outside, Brazil would want people to be productive to a certain extent, even if they are retired. That's my take, right? So in my understanding, I don't see any problem with you working remotely for your U.S. firm, okay? Now, who could find a problem for that? Guess what? It's going to be the U.S. firm, okay? Something that we see also on a recurring basis is going to be like a U.S. employer saying, well, like I have this employee, they want to work from Brazil, and I'm concerned that this is going to create obligations such as, paying taxes, employment benefits, and it does make sense because if you think about it, right, like if your employer is in California and if you are in Texas, guess what? Your California employer, they're going to have a bunch of obligations to Texas just because you as an employee lives in Texas, right? So they are going to make a parallel and they're going to say, well, now, we have a Jay working out of Brazil. Guess what? I don't know. Maybe we need to do something in Brazil. So the typical solution for that is usually for the employee to get a digital nomad visa. And given the language of the digital nomad visa regulation, typically employers in the U.S., they are going to feel more comfortable about having, this employee working out of Brazil. So here is a concern that whatever I tell you is not going to necessarily satisfy your employer, right? Okay, that's another piece. And finally, just another nuance is that if you try to work in Brazil, right? Let's say you get the Brazil retirement visa / residency, you're living in Brazil, and you try to pursue employment. As long as it is informal, most people wouldn't care, right? Like your status. But if you pursue informal employment, like most employers, they are going to be kind of puzzled, right, by the language of the visa, because the visa says, well, retirement, but now you're applying for a job, and maybe I'm not going to want to understand or take the chances that someone is going to tell me, well, he shouldn't be working, okay? All right, Jay, I hope that was helpful. I understand, not necessarily a straightforward answer, but we are here, to share things as they are. And I hope I gave you enough information to better understand the dynamics of the retirement visa. And listen, keep the participation coming and going. All right, Jay. Okay, let me see what else we have. All right, let's take a look at another. All right, so I was thinking about buying a property in Brazil, but it looks like the dollar is getting weaker and weaker. Do you think that this trend is going to reverse in the next couple of months, right? Okay, that's an interesting point. So if you look at the currency exchange, right, like the peak, the recent, like, looking at like a 1 year timeline, the highest exchange rate for the US dollar, it was probably like 5.8, 5.9. I don't recall anymore. And nowadays, I think it's something like 5.4, ranging to 5.3. Okay, so no question about that's a substantial variation. But the way I see is like if you think about a broader timeline, right? Like if you think about the last 2 to 3 years, like the U.S. dollar was actually below the 5.3 mark, right, for most of the time. So even if you look at 5.3 and you say, well, I wish it was 5.8, which I get it, I think, you're going to be in a much better position than a lot of people who would buy a property with a dollar at 4.9 or 5.0, if that makes sense, right? So I would say not that bad, right? Not that bad at all. Is still helping, U.S. citizens buy properties in Brazil. Euro is also a very strong currency. You also get, a lot of punch for your currency. Right now, if it's going to change or not, difficult to tell. If any of us would have an answer, this person would become a billionaire, right? Because you can just go out there and buy options. And then if you know the answer, you become a billionaire in a few years, right? Like, just by, buying options. But nobody knows, even our, colleagues from like the currency exchange banks, like they send some, kind of newsletters, and you can tell, they say, well, these are the, factors in favor of, I don't know, dollar becoming stronger, and these are the factors supporting like a weaker dollar, right? That's all they say. Like they don't say, well, dollar is going to get stronger or weaker, right? So unfortunately, you cannot foretell the future. But life is short. If you are considering buying property in Brazil, current dollar is still great, right? Like if you have any questions about it, just go to a platform like XE, and then look at the US dollar like evolution over the last 5 years, and you're gonna see what I'm saying right here. Christopher, does the Brazil retirement visa is a permanent residency? Can you get a retirement visa while in Brazil on a tourist visa? Christopher, so the Brazil retirement visa, it starts as a temporary residency. Okay, so you first get 2 years if you apply from abroad. If you apply from abroad, you get a visa. Just like in Portugal, you get the visa to enter Brazil. The visa is not gonna remain active. It's just for you to enter Brazil. Once you enter Brazil, you register with the Brazilian Federal Police, and then you get a residency, right? So I like to joke, it's just like the butterfly, right? Like the first stage is like when you have the lagarta, right? You have the lagarta, that's the visa. When you enter Brazil, the lagarta dies, and then you get a butterfly, which is going to be the residency, okay? So the residency under the Brazil retirement route is going to be for 2 years. Once you renew, potentially is going to be renewed as a permanent residency, right? So pretty interesting question. It doesn't start as a permanent residency, but it does get you access to permanent residency in a short while. Can you get a retirement visa while in Brazil on a tourist visa? So when you are in Brazil, like in Brazil, when you're physically in Brazil, typically there are no visas issued, right? So the lagarta that I told you, right? The caterpillar, right? I think it's lagarta caterpillar. It doesn't exist a caterpillar. When you are in Brazil, it starts as a butterfly already. I apologize for that. All right. So when you apply in Brazil, you jump straight to the residency with no visa whatsoever, okay? So as long as you understand you cannot get a visa, yes, even if you're visiting Brazil as a tourist, you can apply as a retirement residency, okay? One of the challenges when you are in Brazil is typically when you gonna present like your FBI background check, and and if you are in Brazil, it may be tough to get the FBI background check. But we do have the FBI fingerprint cards in our office, so that's something we can help you with as well. And I want to say thank you to all of you for your participation. Thank you, Brazil Vibes, as well for the gift. I appreciate the generosity. And letting you know that our next live stream is going to be on next Wednesday, right? Next Wednesday. So we're talking about the 24th, okay? Next live stream is the 24th. Thank you, all of you, for your participation. And I hope to see you again next week. And you all have a blessed rest of your Wednesday.